Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Barny Evans, and I work for WSP, and my role in today's session is to talk about electric vehicles in buildings. I'm going to be fairly quick because I'm conscious of time. So WSP, briefly, we're a global professional services consultancy covering pretty much everything. Our interest in this, my personal interest, goes back to about 2014 when I led a paper where we proposed all electric cities, so electrifying all the heat in our buildings and electrifying all the vehicles. It didn't cause the change I hoped, but I think a lot of it's coming to fruition now. It's quite interesting. We also wrote a paper on autonomous electric vehicles in 2017 and have just been appointed as the technical advisor to the government's charging infrastructure investment fund, which is a £500 million fund in investing, trying to improve our infrastructure. My main job is advising clients who are building new things or advising clients who've got existing buildings on how to manage them, and including electric vehicles. So I'm going to talk big picture, electric vehicles and our energy system. I'm going to be very brief because otherwise I'm going to stomp all over John's territory, and it'll also allow me to get onto the actual buildings themselves. So EVs, the big picture, electric vehicles, the big picture. A graph that looks complicated, you just need to look at the green line. Okay, so the National Grid developed the future energy scenarios, and I think they do it every year. And if you look at the green line, that's what they call their 2-degree scenario. So this is if we do what they think we need to do to be in line with our commitments around climate change and so on. And it's interesting because a long time ago, electric vehicles, there was a panic. They're going to cause chaos. They're going to break our energy system, increase peak demand by 35 gigawatts and so on. And we've become more and more confident and better and more knowledgeable about them, and that's reduced. And if you look at that green line, what it projects is about a peak in about 2035, 2040 of around 10, 11 gigawatts increase in peak demand. Just to put that in context, our peak demand at the moment is about 50, so perhaps a 20% increase and then actually tails off towards 2050 because of better management techniques and more autonomous vehicles that actually end up reducing the total demand. So again, another quick graph, just looking at the red line here. This is their projection for electric vehicle penetration of our system, and it's a fairly traditional S-curve. So at the moment, if you look around 2020 where we are now, they're a bit of a novelty, quite rarely seen. But if you look at 2035, 2040, that's when they're expecting that we'll hit essentially almost every vehicle that will be electrified, and so it will sort of start to flatten off. And it's interesting for a couple of reasons. For starters, that where we reach that flat bit, that could be circa a terawatt hour of electric storage you have in cars. And if you're into energy like I am, that's pretty interesting. But it's also interesting to developers because if you're a major house builder or you're building a major commercial development and you're coming to approach me now and it's the early stages of the project and you're going to be building it out, you might be building it out for 20 years, even longer in some cases, some of these developments. And that means you're in that strange situation where electric vehicles aren't really a big issue today, but by the time you finish your development, everybody's going to be on electric vehicles. And how we manage that is what I get paid to work out. So I'm going to skip over this, but it's just showing how the National Grid proposed to use vehicle to grid and actually use vehicles as part of the solution as well as a problem, but John will probably talk about it a bit better. Annual peak demand, just to try and put that remember I was telling you sort of 10 gigawatt peak increase in peak demand from electric vehicles. It's an interesting fact that since the recession, about 2008, our peak demand was about 59 gigawatts, and it's dropped to about 50 this year. So what's happened in the last decade is, for various reasons, LED lighting, economic recession, industrial deindustrialization, etc., we've reduced by about 9 gigawatts our peak demand. So essentially, we could put electric vehicles into this system and be jumped back where we were in 2008. Yeah, so I'm trying to spread complacency, is what I'm trying to do. It's going to be okay. And okay, so what I'll try and do is I'll try and focus on the electric vehicles in pictures for buildings. So this graph on the top left you can see here, what I've done is I've assumed we're building a new build house and it's going to be all electric because that's what we should do. And the 3 bars you can see there are, on the left you've got an electric vehicle that's going to use about 3,000 kilowatt hours a year, assuming you're doing about 10,000 miles. The thermal demand, wrong word, thermal consumption, electrical consumption would be 1,500 kilowatt hours through a heat pump. And then your other electrics, so your lights, your microwaves, hairdryers and so on, would be about 3,300. So it's quite a significant increase in your electrical demand, but it's in the same scale. It's not off the scale or something. And actually, if you look at a traditional house, so like a 1930s 3-bed semi, which is the bottom graph, because the thermal consumption is much higher, it's even less of an issue on on your domestic buildings. So the point I'm trying to make is that the actual kilowatt hours, the amount of energy, is not a problem. What is a problem is peak demand. It's also an opportunity. So I'm going to give 3 quick examples, and these are really practical because this is literally what we do. These are the people we advise. So if you imagine you're a big supermarket like an Asda or a Sainsbury's, Tesco, that kind of thing, you're a really big out-of-town superstore with hundreds of car parking spaces. Their peak demand is roughly about 200 kilowatts. It varies, obviously, from building to building, but roughly about 200 kilowatts. Now, if you want to provide electric vehicle charging for your customers, which you will do because it's a big commercial opportunity and a major risk if you don't, you need to think about how you're going to do that. And so, to give you a quick example, there are 7 kilowatt chargers, and 7 kilowatt chargers are sort of the faster ones you're allowed to have in your house. So they're nothing impressive. They're pretty slow actually, despite being called fast chargers. If you put 30 of those fast chargers in your car park, which would be very little of the whole car park, you double the peak demand of that site. And you probably can't do that because you simply haven't got the electrical capacity. So it's quite a challenge to work out how we manage that. And there are techniques and ways, and I'll come on to that. So it's not the prophecy of doom. If you look at a domestic scale, a rule of thumb when we work on new developments is that the peak demand, what's called the after diversification maximum energy demand, is about 1.5 kilowatts. So it's 1.5 kilowatts across a whole housing estate because we don't all use our power at the same time. If you're now building a development where every single house is going to have a 7 kilowatt charger on the drive or somewhere on the wall or whatever in the garage, you've got a real massive problem because they could be quite they could coincide quite a lot, and even if they don't coincide a lot, 7 kilowatts is a lot. So if you're a house builder, this is a major issue because this could be the kind of thing that makes developments unviable. And then finally, logistics. We work with the big logistics providers, those massive sheds you see on the side of motorways, kind of things you can play cricket in, and they're interesting because actually, from an energy demand perspective, they're pretty small beer compared to their scale. A really big logistics shed might use 500 kilowatts peak, which is not that great considering their scale, but it's because they're fairly inert. You know, they're mainly storing stuff and moving things around. The problem is you've probably got 200 or 300 car parking spaces where your employees come in from various distances. And just if you try to just to give you an illustration, so proper fast chargers, 22 kilowatt chargers, you'd only be able to put 23 of those in and you would have doubled your peak demand. But it gets even worse because we've got electric HGVs coming and they're going to have huge batteries, 300, 400, 500 kilowatt hour batteries. And they're going to want to charge rapidly because time is money when you're in an HGV in your logistics. And they are trialling these really, really rapid chargers, 250, 400 kilowatt. You could only put 2 of those in and you'd have doubled your peak demand. Think of that, the whole shed, the whole place, you doubled it and you're only charging 2 lorries. So it's a real issue, and so how we manage that. So at WSP we developed what we call 360 energy, and in simple terms that's how we try and look at your building or development or city or anything you want to look at as one system, because increasingly as we electrify everything, all the systems are interconnected, whether it's energy efficiency, solar power, an energy storage device, an electric vehicle, or whatever. So I'm just going to give a quick example of this, bringing it right down to the sort of home level. The graph you can see behind me is the average load of a domestic property. So the red curve goes from midnight to midnight. So the red curve is the average power demand. So you can see it's typical what you'd expect. It's very low at 3 in the morning, rises as we get up, and then we have this little peak about 6 or 7 in the evening because we all come home and cook our dinner and so on. If we then talk to our clients about some new builds, we're going to make it heat pumps and electrics, great. We put that heat pump on, that's the grey line. So this is people just having no incentive to do anything else. They're just going to heat their house and heat their water as they would. You've got a big problem. You've just doubled the demand again. But even worse, you bought a Nissan Leaf and then you come home at 6 o'clock and you plug that in, that's the black line. And the electric vehicle charge you get now, you've probably trebled the peak demand. And that's a huge problem. It's a huge problem for existing homes, you've got massive problems there, but even for new build it's a huge problem. So this is the worst graph from my presentation, but because I should have done something different, but what we do with our 360 model is we model all the energy systems and how we can use energy storage and energy efficiency and so on. And what we work out is how we can reduce that peak demand, because that's the crucial thing, I would say. Is the most important thing I say in energy now is the when of energy is as important as the how much. It's a crucial thing to remember. And so we're showing a 15% reduction there just using energy storage and using price signals to encourage people to charge their vehicles overnight. But when we do this properly and we go into quite a lot of detail, you can reduce that peak demand by about 50%. So it's a real bonus for our clients, but also the building occupants. So I'll finish off there. So I think I would say to any of you, whatever you're doing, within reason, if you're looking at energy system, you need to think of energy as one system now. So you need to model all the energy elements in a like I said, a whole development or a building or a city as one. And you can create a baseline energy demand profile, and then you layer on the things we're talking about. So you look at your solar power that we were talking about earlier, the energy efficiency, what you could do, LED lighting, for example, demand side management, which John will talk about a bit more, how we can move your electric vehicle charging around, how you can use energy storage in the building or on the network and so on. And then you can finalize energy decisions and make the best use of your model. So that's my advice. Thank you very much.